That night, Pucang Wetan village was quieter than usual. Cold winds slipped through the woven bamboo walls of the houses. Carrying the damp scent of soil, a pale half-moon hung in the sky, but its light was not enough to chase away the darkness that pooled between the banana trees and the bamboo grove at the edge of the village. In the last house at the very end of the road, a tiny infant had just fallen asleep in his cradle. His name was Wewe. Earlier that day, his family had held a Selapanan ritual, a Javanese tradition for babies who reached 35 days old. Family members, neighbors, and village elders gathered, bringing offerings of tumpeng, red and white porridge, and long, whispered prayers, asking that Wewe grow up healthy and safe from harm. But amid the cheerful atmosphere, one old woman had leaned in close to Wewe's mother and whispered words that chilled her heart. "Watch your baby carefully tonight," the old woman murmured. "Why, Grandma?" Wewe's mother had asked. Confused, "Don't ask too much. Just don't leave him alone. Not until sunrise. Wewe Gombel loves little children, especially after their Selapanan." Wewe's mother had only nodded faintly. To her, it was nothing more than a story to scare young mothers into being cautious. But at exactly 1 o'clock in the morning, when all the houses had gone dark and even the crickets seemed to fall silent, a strange sound rose from the hills beyond the bamboo grove, at first faint, like the faintest whisper of metal on wood, then clearer a gamelan, slow, deliberate, as if someone was holding a quiet midnight ceremony. The sound roused Wewe's mother from her light sleep. She sat on her bed, listening, then walked to the window, peeking through the bamboo slats. She scanned the yard. Nothing, only shadows and swaying leaves. Her gaze drifted back to Wewe's cradle. He was still there, his face serene. But as she reached down to touch him, her heart froze. His little fingers felt icy. Outside, the gamelan music grew louder, and then she heard it, another sound weaving into the melody. The faint, pitiful crying of a baby. Her breath caught. Her feet moved almost on their own toward the door. The air outside was even colder. The banana trees swayed as if some unseen presence brushed past them. The gamelan now mingled with soft laughter, a woman's laughter, high-pitched and mocking, and faint footsteps padding across the earth. Yet, the path ahead lay empty. At the edge of the road, near the bamboo grove, something moved. She saw her. A tall, white-clad figure stood under the trees, her hair hanging long and tangled, her bony arms holding something, 2 slings of cloth, cradling 2 tiny shapes. From where the figure stood, the sound of babies crying grew louder. Wewe's mother couldn't move. The air grew so cold her breath came out in plumes. Her eyes stayed locked on the figure, even when her own baby suddenly wailed from inside the house. His cry broke the spell. She spun on her heel and rushed back inside, only to stop dead in the doorway. The cradle was empty, but Wewe's crying still echoed. From above her, slowly, with a trembling hand, she tilted her head back from the roof, between the layers of thatched grass. She saw a pale, bony hand reaching down, clutching a baby sling, and outside, the gamelan music stopped. That night, the entire village woke to the sound of her screams. That night, the entire village woke to the sound of her screams. One by one, oil lamps flickered to life across the little bamboo houses. Doors creaked open. Sleepy, confused villagers stumbled out into the chill night air, clutching shawls and kerosene lamps. "What's happening?" one of the men called out, but his voice trembled. Nobody answered. Everyone's gaze was fixed on the last house at the end of the road, Wewe's house. From the doorway, Wewe's mother was crouched on the floor, clutching her head, sobbing. Her cries mingled with the faint, eerie sound of a baby crying. But the sound didn't come from the cradle inside. It came from above, the roof. A few of the younger men exchanged nervous glances. Finally, 2 of them stepped forward, carrying long bamboo poles and holding their breath. They slowly climbed up the roof. The thatch rustled softly as they pried apart layers of the dried grass, Everyone on the ground held their breath. Then, silence, until one of the men let out a strangled gasp. He raised his hand, holding up a wet, blood-streaked piece of baby sling cloth. Everyone saw it clearly, but there was no baby, only footprints, tiny, muddy footprints, bare. They trailed across the roof, then down the back of the house, disappearing into the darkness of the narrow path that led to the bamboo grove. For a long moment, no one moved. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. Then one of the older women broke the silence, her voice low but steady. "Call Embakarmi." Her words sent a ripple of fear through the crowd. Moments later, a figure emerged from the shadows, a bent old woman with long, silver-white hair and dark, wrinkled skin. Her thin fingers gripped a wooden cane that tapped lightly with each step. Her name was Embakarmi, the oldest in the village. She stopped just outside Bayu's house, scanning the roof. Then the bamboo grove beyond. Her eyes narrowed. The wind blew harder then, carrying with it the faint sound of gamelan, slow, deliberate notes weaving into the cold air, and then the unmistakable sound of more babies crying. But it wasn't just Bayu anymore. It sounded like dozens. Embakarmi's lips curled into the faintest, bitter smile. "She has them now," she murmured, her voice so quiet only those nearest could hear. Bayu's mother scrambled toward her on her knees, clutching at the old woman's skirt, her eyes wild with desperation. "Please, bring him back. Please." Embakarmi's face softened for just a moment, then she nodded slowly. "Tomorrow night," she said simply, "I will go there, but no one must follow me. If anyone follows, no one comes back." Bayu's mother collapsed to the floor in tears as the crowd began to back away, muttering prayers under their breath. But even as they returned to their homes, no one dared to sleep, and just before dawn, the gamelan sounded again, faint but clear, drifting from the bamboo grove. This time, it was joined by a chorus of cries, pitiful, desperate cries of babies from her porch. Embakarmi stood silently, watching the grove sway in the darkness, the faintest smirk on her lips. "Tomorrow night," she whispered to herself, "it will be time. It will be time." Those words lingered in Embakarmi's mind long after the sun rose. The day passed in silence. The villagers kept to themselves, doors shut tight, curtains drawn. No children played in the dusty yard that morning. No laughter rang out between the houses. Everyone waited, and everyone listened. By late afternoon, whispers began to spread through the village. Some said they could still hear faint cries, even in daylight, coming from the bamboo grove. Others claimed to see pale shapes moving between the trees when no one was looking. As dusk fell, the air grew colder than usual. Embakarmi emerged from her home just after sundown. She wore her black batik jarik, a faded white kebaya, and a long scarf draped over her shoulders. In one hand, she carried her walking stick, in the other, a small bundle wrapped in white cloth. The villagers gathered at the edge of the road as she passed, none daring to speak to her. Some lowered their heads, others murmured prayers under their breath. She stopped briefly at Bayu's house. The young mother stood outside, her face pale, her eyes hollow from a night of crying. Embakarmi looked at her, but said nothing. She simply nodded once before turning to face the bamboo grove. The path into the grove was narrow, overgrown, and swallowed in shadows. As she stepped onto it, the faintest sound of gamelan began to drift through the air, slow and rhythmic, as though it had been playing all along, waiting for her to arrive. She walked steadily, her cane tapping softly against the earth. The further she went, the colder the air became. A fine mist curled around her feet. Clinging to her jarik, the moonlight above was quickly swallowed by the dense canopy of bamboo. Soon, the village was no longer visible behind her. Only darkness remained. The music grew louder, and beneath it, Another sound emerged, a chorus of crying babies, the wails high-pitched and hollow, echoing through the grove. She stopped briefly and closed her eyes. She recognized that sound when she opened them again. She was standing at a clearing deep within the grove. The mist here was thick, and the ground was soft and damp, scattered with dead leaves. In the center of the clearing stood a tall figure, a woman. Her white dress shimmered faintly, though it was tattered and torn in places. Her hair fell long and tangled, covering much of her face. Her arms were thin, her fingers impossibly long, and from each arm hung several baby slings, cradling pale, motionless infants. The woman's head tilted slightly, and though her face was hidden, her smile was unmistakable. "You've come at last," she said, her voice like wind through dry leaves. Emma Carmi didn't flinch. "Yes," she replied calmly, "the time has come." The woman let out a soft, eerie laugh, the sound of it blending with the cries of the babies and the haunting notes of the gamelan. "You know what you have to do," the woman whispered. Emma Carmi tightened her grip on the white bundle in her hand, her eyes narrowing as she stepped closer. "Yes," she said again, "I know." As the music swelled and the mist thickened, the clearing seemed to close in around them, and the cries of the babies grew deafening, filling the air with a chilling sorrow. But Emma Carmi stood firm, staring into the darkness where the woman's face should have been. This was the moment she had been dreading all these years, and tonight, at last, she would end it. The last light of the sun had faded completely, and now the bamboo grove was alive. As Emma Carmi stepped deeper into the grove, the air grew icy cold. Mist swirled around her ankles, curling between the roots like pale fingers. Above her, the towering stalks of bamboo groaned and swayed. Though the wind was barely a whisper, the faint sound of gamelan rose all around her, as though the trees themselves were playing in metallic, mournful notes that echoed endlessly through the darkness. She did not flinch. She did not look back. Her cane tapped steadily against the earth as she walked, and with each step, the cries of the babies grew louder, dozens of them, wailing, whimpering. Then, through the mist ahead, she saw it a soft white glow marking the edge of a clearing. She stopped at the threshold and looked up. There she was. The figure in white stood tall in the center of the clearing, framed by the shimmering mist. Her long black hair spilled over her face and shoulders. Tangled and damp, her arms hung at her sides, impossibly long and thin, and from each wrist dangled baby slings, each cradling a pale, still child. When she finally lifted her head, her mouth curled into a smile wide, mocking, inhuman. "You came," the figure said, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut the air. "Yes," Emma Carmi replied calmly, though her grip tightened on the white bundle in her hand. "The time has come." The figure tilted her head slightly. "Has it?" Emma Carmi took a step forward, planting her cane firmly into the soft ground. "No more games. You've taken enough. It ends tonight." The figure in white let out a laugh, not loud, but low and hollow, like water dripping in a deep well. "These little ones were already mine," she said. "Their mothers never truly wanted them. They left them alone in the night. They let them cry and cry unheard, forgotten. That is when I found them." She swayed slightly, and the babies in her slings let out a soft, eerie chorus of cries. Emma Carmi stood her ground. Maybe, but not this one. Slowly, she unwrapped the bundle in her hands, revealing a tiny figure wrapped in white. Bayu, his face was pale, his lips almost blue, but his tiny chest still rose and fell faintly. The figure in white tilted her head farther, her smile fading into a thin, straight line. "You brought him here. Why?" she asked. "To finish this," Emma Carmi said simply. She set Bayu down gently on the ground in front of her. Then she reached into her jerrick and drew out a fistful of dried flowers, scattering them in a circle around the baby. The figure hissed and took a step forward, but Emma Carmi raised her cane and drove it into the earth with a loud crack. The ground trembled, the mist recoiled, the figure froze in place, her smile replaced by a scowl. "This one is not yours," Embakarmi said firmly, her voice low but unwavering, "and the others are not for you to keep, not anymore." For the first time, the figure's shoulders sagged, the cries of the babies quieted, replaced by soft whimpers. The mist thickened around her feet, and slowly she began to fade, her body breaking into wisps of white that curled into the air. As she vanished, her voice lingered, soft and bitter. "This is not over, old woman. Not yet." And then silence. The clearing was still. The gamelan had stopped. Embakarmi leaned down, picked up Bayu, and cradled him in her arms. His eyes fluttered open, and though his face was pale, he let out a soft cry alive. With slow, steady steps, she turned and began the long walk back to the village. Behind her, the mist began to settle once more over the grove, but the cries of the babies were gone. For tonight, at least, it was over. The village of Pucang Wetan woke that morning to the faint sound of roosters crowing, as though nothing had happened. But for those who'd stayed awake through the long, cold night, they all knew, the mist still hung low over the bamboo grove, yet the cries of babies were gone, and the haunting gamelan no longer drifted through the air. When Embakarmi returned, carrying Bayu in her arms, the villagers gathered quietly in the middle of the road. No one dared speak as she passed. Bayu stirred in her arms, letting out a weak but steady cry, and the young mother collapsed in tears when Embakarmi placed him in her lap, alive. That should have been the end of it, but Embakarmi knew better. Late that afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, she stood alone in the yard behind her house, staring at the grove in the distance. Her cane was planted firmly in the ground beside her, and in her free hand, she clutched something tightly, a lock of long, black hair. It had been left behind on the ground where the figure vanished. She studied it for a long time, even in daylight. It seemed to writhe slightly, as though it had a life of its own. She wrapped it in a scrap of white cloth and tucked it deep into the folds of her jerrick before turning back toward the village. That night, as she prepared to sleep, a faint sound reached her ears. It was subtle, so subtle she thought she'd imagined it at first, a single hollow note of a gamelan, then silence, but her sharp eyes caught movement at her window just for a moment. A pale, thin hand pressed against the bamboo slats, leaving a faint smear of earth behind. And then it was gone. The next morning, she called the village elders to her home. They sat cross-legged on the floor, listening intently as she spoke in her low, steady voice. "She is not finished," Embakarmi told them. "Last night, I drove her back into the grove, but the pact was never fully broken. Someone long ago agreed to let her take what she wanted, and as long as that promise remains unbroken, she will return. Not tonight, maybe not next month, but someday." The elders exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, one of them asked, his voice barely a whisper, "Then what should we do?" Embakarmi's eyes, sharp and dark as flint, narrowed. "Watch your children," she said. "Never leave them to cry alone. Never let them feel unloved, because that is when she comes." She paused, glancing at the mist rising faintly from the grove beyond. "And if she does, remember this." From her jerrick, she pulled the lock of black hair and placed it on the floor between them. "She always leaves something behind, and that is how you know she's still watching." As the elders left her home, none of them spoke. The quiet warning weighed heavy on their hearts, and in the distance, just as the sun began to set, a faint sound carried on the wind, the soft, hollow notes of a gamelan. The soft, hollow notes of a gamelan floated through the dusk air, faint but impossible to ignore. Embakarmi stood on her porch, her cane in one hand, her other clutching the lock of black hair wrapped in white cloth. She watched the bamboo grove swaying in the distance, its shadows already beginning to swallow the last light of day. She had known this moment would come. That night, as the village settled into uneasy sleep, Embakarmi set out one final time. She wore her black jerrik and her faded white kebaya, her hair tied back. Around her neck hung the lock of hair, bound tightly like a talisman. The path into the grove seemed darker than ever before. The mist was thicker now, curling and shifting around her feet, as if alive above her. The towering bamboo creaked and groaned in the windless night. With each step, the gamelan grew louder. And this time, the crying of the babies did not join the melody. When she reached the clearing, she stopped. The figure was already there. Wewe Gombel stood in the center, her long, tangled hair framing her face. Her pale, bony arms were empty now, no babies slung from her shoulders. She stood still, waiting. Her smile was gone. "You've come," the figure whispered, her voice softer than ever. "Yes," Embakarmi replied. Her voice was steady. "It ends tonight." Wewe Gombel tilted her head, her empty eyes glinting faintly in the moonlight. "You can't break what was promised," she said. "Not by you, not by anyone." Embakarmi stepped closer. "You're right," she said. "I can't." She reached into her jerrik and drew out the lock of black hair with her cane. She carved a circle into the earth at her feet, then placed the hair at its center. "But I can give back what you left behind," she said. Wewe Gombel froze, her thin fingers curling into fists. "You've taken what isn't yours," Embakarmi continued, "and you've left this behind. Every time. That was your mistake." The ground within the circle began to glow faintly as she whispered a prayer under her breath, an old one, taught to her by her own grandmother. The wind picked up, whipping her hair around her face. Wewe Gombel let out a hiss sharp, feral, and stepped forward, but the moment her feet touched the circle, the glow flared bright. Her form began to unravel, strands of her hair whipping free, her white dress shredding into tatters of mist. "No," she shrieked. "You can't." Her words were cut off as the glow consumed her entirely. The sound of the gamelan shattered into silence, and then she was gone. The grove fell quiet. Embakarmi stood in the clearing, her breath coming in slow, heavy gulps. She closed her eyes, letting the silence settle over her. For the first time in years, the grove felt still empty. She knelt, gathered the ashes of the black hair, and scattered them to the wind. When she returned to the village, the air was calm, the mist was gone. Bayou's mother was waiting at her door, clutching her child to her chest. The baby was sleeping soundly, his tiny chest rising and falling. Embakarmi gave her a faint smile and nodded once before retreating into her home. That night, for the first time in a generation, Pucang Wetan slept in peace, and the bamboo grove stayed silent.